Like a zombie hand reaching from the grave, Mass Effect Andromeda is once again on our lips. We've done eulogies, we've cried about what's happened, we've spoken about the development cycle that may have ruined a franchise that was one of the most beloved in the video game industry, and this week, a renounced and hated brown-skinned person who most of the video game community has derailed as a racist because maybe he made fun of the white culture hegemony that controls this world. Manveer Ayer, King Curry himself, was on Waypoint Radio, a Vice affiliate, and spoke at length about his time on Mass Effect Andromeda, specifically the issues involving whitewashing. Now, this interview is important for a lot of reasons. He talks about the corporate culture there and how it kind of, in his mind, affected the downfall of this one great franchise, how Bioware is now looking towards more of a constant, invariable revenue system where games make money far beyond their initial release date. We look at what's happening in Destiny. It's essentially the destinification, if you will, of video games, how people bought thousands of dollars of loot boxes for Mass Effect Andromeda and what this means for Anthem. All that's important, but perhaps the most important thing that scares me the most of what's happening with BioWare is what Manveer said about whitewashing. Now, Andromeda had the potential to deal with one of the most interesting conflicts that video games have until this moment not addressed: the colonization of one superpower to another. If we look at history, any time a new power is introduced and attempts to subjugate another person, almost invariably it ends with the enslavement and destruction of that individual and even that individual's culture. Mass Effect Andromeda was dealing with this on a grand scale, and the development team knew it. These are some smart people, and they wanted to address these issues. According to Manveer, very early on, himself and a bunch of other white people that were in the development team spoke to the people in charge and said, this is something we have to address. We need to talk about the difficult issues of what people from the Milky Way galaxy would be doing to new species that currently exist in the Andromeda cluster. Could we make choices, perhaps, that would enslave them at the benefit of our kind? Where does that line divide between you as an individual and you as a species? That's a game I want to play, and it turns out that was a game that the development team wanted to make. In Manveer's words, though, the white people in charge weren't impressed. This is a direct excerpt from the interview. I wasn't the only one. There were other people. There were other white people, white men, who spoke up. There's a lot of good people inside of BioWare who spoke up on this stuff, he said. This is what happens, I think, when you have a homogenous leadership. The leadership of Mass Effect Andromeda was all white men. And we look back, we have director Mac Walters, we have producer Fabrice Condimas, I'm sorry if I say your name correctly, Mike Gamble, of course, who appeared on the show, who was nothing but gracious, Fernando Mello, another producer on the program. It's not to say that these individuals are bad or harbor ill will, but I think Mass Effect Andromeda is a good litmus test for why it is so important to have diverse opinions and perspectives when creating art, especially in the video game sector. So, a lot of people may not identify as a minority in any sort of meaningful way. A lot of white people that are playing games, it's very easy for them to say that I would not benefit from this game because I don't necessarily live that experience of a minority. I don't need to know what that's like. This is space travel. This is a whole new world. We don't need to look in the world from these eliminating lines of the past. I think this is an example of not having that leadership, though, that perspective in the inner circle of BioWare led to its downfall. We see from a couple of articles some of the early concept art that had you, as a settler, making more important and impactful choices on these settlements. Whether or not on Prodromos you had a more military-oriented individual that changed the effects of the galaxy. It's easy for us to say now that one other perspective for a minority voice would have changed it. There's no guarantee that one other individual could have changed this, but when the entire development team, when the heads of a company that are hoping to speak to an issue that naturally they have almost no interaction with beyond benefiting, as I do and maybe you do in your daily life, through the systemic racism that occurs when one culture has complete domination of another and a subjugation through colonization. When that is your perspective, I think it's harder to make those hard choices and say, I want to make a game where Andromeda, you have to make those choices about enslaving someone, about whether you promote ideas of systemic rape in the residential schools of the Andromeda galaxy. This is important because this affects how other games will be played, how future Bioware products will be received. If the praxis of all white, all right still continues for games like Anthem and Dragon Age 4, I think we're going to face similar problems. The Dragon Age team is made of different stuff. We had Patrick Weeks on the show beforehand, and he, I think, is one of the best game writers in the business. I think he appreciates these perspectives. They went above and beyond in Dragon Age to ensure that when a trans character was represented, that they got that information from different sources. He said himself that he wants more trans actors to play trans characters. This game studio has made big, bold choices when it comes to sexual orientation. I think now the last avenue for success in Dragon Age 4 is to get some minority voices in there that are not just other white women, which is important, or other different gender representations, which is important. But clearly, the studio needs to have a more diverse background to tell stories that are more true. And if you're more upset than loot boxes than you are about white leadership, there's very little I can say to you. If this bothers you because you want art that is more complete, then I speak your language and I want you to keep listening. Again, what do you think? Is Manveer just a uppity racist that should be ashamed and has nothing to do with video games? Or maybe he has a point that everyone in a studio that makes choices for a game that's played by millions shouldn't be the same color that come from the same place. I'm Andy Borkowski. Remember to bleed for your art. Keep listening to VGS.